The stagecoach rocked violently as it hit another rut, the wheels groaning under the weight of the journey and the merciless terrain of the West. Abigail Greenfield clutched her carpet-bag tighter against her stomach, the well-worn letter folded inside already crumpled and stained from the 1,000 times she'd read it. She pressed her forehead against the cracked glass, watching the endless ribbon of dust unfurl behind them, a serpent made of earth and regret. The letter's words still burned in her mind: I seek a good woman, stout of heart and frame, for partnership in life and land. It had seemed like Providence, a miracle delivered through the frail hands of the postman back in New York. In that moment, she believed a new life was not only possible but inevitable. Somewhere beyond the endless plains and jagged mountains waited a man who would see her not as a burden, not as a joke, but as a prize. The thought should have brought her comfort, but Abigail's fingers twisted the letter until the paper threatened to tear. Her mind betrayed her with ugly memories, cruel whispers behind embroidered fans, dances where she stood like a forgotten statue against the wall, suitors who sneered once they glimpsed her full figure. Too much woman, one man had muttered to another, their laughter punching holes through her composure. The driver barked over his shoulder that they'd be arriving at Coyote Hollow within the hour. Abigail swallowed hard. Beyond the window, the horizon shimmered with heat. Her heart did the same, part hope, part terror. When the coach lurched to a stop, she stepped down carefully, boots striking the dusty ground with an awkward finality. The town sprawled before her, a few crooked buildings leaning like old men, a saloon with swinging doors, and a mercantile with a sun-bleached sign. Coyote Hollow smelled of horses, sweat, and opportunity. She straightened her skirts and dabbed the sweat from her brow with a handkerchief. Somewhere among these dusty souls waited Mr. Daniel Finch, her future. A man approached, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat tilted low over his eyes. His coat was fine, too fine for this hardscrabble town, and he had the swagger of someone who thought the world owed him a favor. Abigail's heart clanged like a church bell. She smoothed her hair and stepped forward, offering her best smile. "Mr. Finch," she ventured, voice trembling. He glanced at her with lazy indifference, eyes flickering up and down her frame like a man appraising livestock. His mouth curled into a sneer before he even bothered answering. "You Abigail?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He snorted and turned to the driver as if she weren't even there. "Ain't what the letter said." Her face flushed, her hands knotting in the fabric of her skirt. I can work. I'm strong. I can sew, cook, tend to animals." Finch waved a hand dismissively as though swatting away a gnat. "I said stout, not overgrown." "You misled me." The words hit harder than any fist. Around them, townsfolk slowed their chores to stare, their eyes sharpening with mean curiosity. Abigail wanted the earth to crack open and swallow her whole. "I didn't mislead anyone," she whispered. He chuckled cruelly, tipping his hat back to reveal pale, contemptuous eyes. "I ain't taking you. Find someone else to feed you." And just like that, he turned and strode away, boots kicking up cruel little puffs of dust in her face. For a moment, Abigail stood frozen, the world tilting crazily around her. She couldn't breathe. The sky was too wide, the ground too uncertain. A child snickered nearby. An old woman clucked her tongue. Somewhere a dog barked, indifferent to her humiliation. Hot tears blurred her vision. She stumbled toward the mercantile, anywhere but here under their accusing gazes. The door creaked mournfully as she pushed inside, drawing a few more looks she pretended not to see. Inside, the smell of old flour and kerosene hit her nose. She clutched the nearest shelf for balance, blinking rapidly. Behind the counter, a wiry man with a tobacco-stained beard eyed her wearily. "Help you, miss?" No, thank you." Her voice cracked. She backed out into the street, the sun like a hammer against her skull. She didn't remember how her feet moved, only that they did, carrying her past the saloon, the blacksmith, the jeering glances, the pitying looks. Her chest tightened with each step until it felt like she might break apart entirely. She didn't notice when the town gave way to scrubland or when the packed earth turned to wild grasses that brushed against her skirts. Only when she reached the edge of the woods did she stop, lungs burning, vision spinning. She collapsed to her knees in the dirt, gasping raggedly. The letters slipped from her bag and fluttered away on the breeze like a ghost, all her hopes worth no more than scraps. She wept then, great, heaving sobs that tore free from the cage she'd tried to lock them in. She wept for every unkind word, every dismissal, every cruel laugh. She wept for the foolish dream she had dared to cradle in her heart. Tears mingled with the dust on her cheeks, painting her a woman undone. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched long across the prairie. A cool wind stirred the grasses. Abigail hugged her arms around herself, shivering despite the heat. Night was coming fast, and with it, danger. She became aware of a presence. At first, she thought it was her imagination, born from fear and exhaustion. But then she heard it, a heavy tread, deliberate yet cautious, crunching the brittle grass. Heart hammering, Abigail scrambled to her feet, swiping at her tear-streaked face. She whirled around, fists clenched uselessly. A man stood just at the edge of the treeline, half swallowed by the deepening shadows. His silhouette was massive, broad-shouldered, hat slung low. Not moving. Watching. Panic surged up her throat. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her skirts. "Easy, miss," came a voice, low and rough, yet oddly gentle. "Ain't fixin' to hurt you." The stranger stepped forward into the dying light. He was enormous, built like the very trees that loomed behind him. His beard was thick, dark, and wild as the forest itself. His clothes were plain but well made, his boots looked worn from honest labor, not vanity. Despite herself, Abigail froze. Something in his posture, cautious, respectful, stayed her flight. "You're a long ways from town," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. She opened her mouth to answer, but only a soft whimper came out. The man's gaze softened. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Name's Jack McGraw," he offered. "Got a cabin not far. Safer there than here when the coyotes start prowling." The thought of being alone in the wilderness overnight made Abigail's blood turn to ice. Yet, every instinct she had screamed caution. This was a stranger, after all, a man bigger than any she had ever seen. Could she trust him? Jack seemed to sense her hesitation. He took a deliberate step back, giving her space, lowering his hands to show they were empty. "You can follow me at your pace," he said quietly. "Or stay here and hope the wolves don't catch your scent. Choice is yours, miss." The wind picked up, whispering through the tall grasses like unseen voices. In the distance, a coyote's mournful howl split the coming dark. Abigail squared her shoulders, drawing herself up to her full, ample height. She was tired of being afraid. She had crossed half a continent already. She had survived worse than loneliness, worse than cruelty. Without a word, she lifted her chin and took a step toward Jack McGraw. The hint of a smile touched his mouth, not mocking, but warm, approving. He turned without another word, leading her into the gathering twilight, toward the dense, wild heart of the forest. As the trees swallowed them, Abigail cast one last glance over her shoulder at the town of Coyote Hollow, now little more than a smear of false promises against the horizon. She did not look back again. The forest closed around them like a cathedral of towering pines, the air damp and rich with the scents of earth and moss. Abigail stumbled after Jack, her boots snagging on twisted roots and fallen branches. Twilight seeped through the trees in thin, silver veins, painting everything in muted shadow. Each step deeper into the woods pulled her farther from the life she had known, farther from the sting of humiliation that still burned on her skin. Jack moved with an easy, grounded grace, as though the land itself bent to accommodate his weight. Occasionally, he glanced back to make sure she hadn't fallen too far behind. His presence, though massive, carried no menace. If anything, he seemed to be holding himself smaller, as if careful not to frighten her. They crossed a shallow creek where Abigail's skirts caught the water and clung to her legs, chilling her to the bone. Jack paused midstream, offering a thick, calloused hand without a word. After a brief hesitation, she took it. His grip was warm and solid, steadying her with a touch so gentle it surprised her. In the few seconds their hands met, something unspoken passed between them, a tenuous bridge spanning two wounded hearts. A clearing opened up ahead, revealing a stout log cabin tucked against the shoulder of a low hill. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, and the faint golden flicker of lamplight spilled from the windows. The cabin looked rough but sturdy, as if it had been there forever, holding its ground against time and storm alike. Jack led her to the door and swung it open with a casual push. "Come on in," he said. "Ain't fancy, but it's dry and warm." Inside, the space was small but welcoming. A fire crackled merrily in the stone hearth, filling the room with heat and the comforting aroma of burning pine. Rough-hewn shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars of preserves, tools, and bundles of dried herbs. A table and two chairs sat in the center, their surfaces scarred from years of use. Against the far wall was a narrow cot, neatly made. Jack set his hat on a peg and moved to stir the pot hanging over the fire. The smell of stew, rich and savory, filled the air, making Abigail's empty stomach rumble. "Sit yourself down," Jack said, ladling stew into two battered tin bowls. He slid one across the table toward her. Abigail hesitated, then lowered herself into a chair. The wood creaked under her, but the chair held firm. She picked up a spoon with trembling fingers, the simple gesture of being offered food almost too much after the day's brutal cruelty. They ate in silence for a time, the only sounds the clink of spoons and the pop of the fire. Abigail sneaked glances at Jack over her bowl. Up close, he was even more rugged, his hands scarred, his arms thick with muscle, his beard unruly. Yet there was a calmness to him, a steadiness that seemed rare in a world built on bravado. After a while, Jack leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms loosely over his chest. His eyes, a deep shade of green touched by gold, regarded her without judgment. "You runnin' from something?" he asked. Abigail set down her spoon carefully. She could lie, but what would be the point? Her shame was already writ large across her face, her very presence here proof of her failure. "I came out west to marry a man," she said, her voice rough. He took one look at me and changed his mind. Jack's brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing, waiting. Abigail forced herself to continue. He said I misled him. That I wasn't what he ordered. She laughed bitterly, the sound raw and broken. Like I'm a crate of apples gone bad in the shipping. Jack's jaw flexed, but he still said nothing, letting the silence hold space for her words. I didn't lie, she said fiercely. I'm strong. I'm kind. I work hard. But none of that mattered once he saw. She gestured helplessly at herself. Jack drummed his fingers once against the table. That man's a damn fool, he said simply. The words hit her like a bomb, unexpected and healing. She blinked rapidly, willing back the tears that threatened to rise again. Jack shifted in his chair, suddenly awkward. Ain't nobody's worth measured by what they fit into, Abigail. Folks out here need strength, grit. Not some scrawny dandy too delicate to lift a feed sack. She laughed softly, surprised by the rough humor and even more by the warmth that stirred in her chest. Jack smiled faintly. Besides, I reckon the wolves would not have minded a scrawny fella. They'd have eaten him right quick. Another laugh bubbled out, more genuine this time. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little. The fire crackled on, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the night deepened, punctuated by the distant calls of owls and the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. You're welcome to stay here, Jack said, his voice low. Long as you need. Safe roof, hot meals. I ain't a skin for nothing in return. Abigail studied him carefully. His offer sounded honest, but honesty was a currency rarely spent freely in her experience. Yet everything about Jack, from his plain words to the open way he met her gaze, whispered of trust. I thank you, she said. I don't know what I'll do next, but thank you. Jack nodded once, as if that settled things. He rose and moved to stoke the fire, his bulk casting a large, comforting shadow. I'll take the floor, he said gruffly. Cot's yours. No, I couldn't possibly. My house, he said, cutting her off gently. My rules. There was no arguing with that kind of stubborn kindness. Abigail rose from the table and moved toward the cot, peeling off her dust-choked outer layers. Jack handed her a rough wool blanket, and she clutched it gratefully. Settling onto the cot, she marveled at how quickly exhaustion claimed her. The day's sorrows and fears weighed down her limbs like lead. She watched Jack settle himself near the fire, a rifle within easy reach, his hat pulled low over his eyes. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Abigail felt a fragile thread of safety weave its way into her frayed soul. As sleep closed in, she heard Jack's voice, low and rumbling in the darkness. Don't fret none, Abigail. The West's got a way of mending what's been broke. The fire's glow blurred into a golden mist, and Abigail surrendered to sleep, her dreams filled with towering forests, crackling hearths, and the steady, watchful presence of a man who, against all odds, had seen her not with disdain, but with quiet, unwavering acceptance. The dawn would bring new troubles, that much she knew. But for tonight, in this cabin deep in the wild, she was simply a woman with a beating heart and a fighting chance. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like an old song. Somewhere far off, wolves howled into the darkness, but none dared come near the cabin where a giant stood watch and a broken heart dared to heal. And from the edge of the woods, unseen but keenly felt, danger stirred, drawing closer with the rising moon. The morning light broke through the trees in pale ribbons, casting a soft gold over the cabin walls. Abigail woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the crackling sounds of bacon frying in a skillet. For a moment, she lay still, drinking in the warmth, the unfamiliar sense of safety. But reality seeped back quickly, dragging yesterday's wounds to the surface. She sat up slowly, wrapping the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. Across the cabin, Jack moved with easy efficiency, flipping bacon with the edge of a knife, his broad back to her. He wore only a loose shirt tucked into worn trousers, the muscles in his arms flexing as he worked. There was something profoundly grounding about him, as if he was hewn from the very bones of the earth itself. "Coffee's hot," he said without turning. Abigail rose, smoothing her skirts. She moved toward the table, feeling awkward, heavy in her own skin. Jack poured her a mug and set it down without ceremony, then dropped a slab of bacon onto a tin plate and pushed it toward her. "You sleep all right?" he asked, finally looking her way. She nodded, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "Better than I have in a long time." Jack grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. He pulled up a chair, settling across from her with his own plate. For a while, they ate in companionable silence. The food was simple, but it tasted like salvation. Abigail found herself watching him more than she meant to, his quiet movements, the thoughtful way he chewed, the way he glanced out the window between bites as if listening to something only he could hear. Finally, she set her fork down, steeling herself. "I can't stay here forever," she said softly. Jack's green-gold eyes locked onto hers. "Wasn't expecting you to. But I don't know where else to go." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her with a gaze as sharp as a whetted blade. "You got a good head, good hands. World's bigger than one lousy town." A small laugh escaped her lips, brittle as dry grass. "The world don't exactly open its arms to women like me, Jack." He tilted his head slightly. "Maybe you just ain't been in the right part of it yet." Before she could respond, a sharp, distant crack shattered the morning calm. Abigail stiffened. Jack was already on his feet, moving to the door in 2 quick strides. He eased it open, scanning the trees. "What is it?" she whispered, heart hammering. Jack held up a hand for silence. The woods beyond the clearing seemed to hold its breath. Then came another sound, closer this time, the unmistakable crunch of boots on brittle underbrush. Jack's hand dropped to the rifle propped near the door. He motioned Abigail back toward the hearth, away from the windows. She obeyed, her throat tight, her body rigid with fear. She watched as Jack positioned himself just inside the doorway, a shadow among shadows, the rifle cradled in his arms like an extension of his will. More footsteps. Voices, low and laughing, punctuated with ugly sharpness. Abigail's stomach knotted. Whoever was coming, they weren't friendly. Jack waited, still as stone, until the first figure broke through the trees, a man, lean and mean-looking, his face half hidden under a grimy hat. 2 more followed, rough men. Low on their hips. The leader spat into the dirt and called out, "Morning, neighbor. Fine little cabin you got there." Jack said nothing. The man stepped closer, hands held loosely away from his sides in a mockery of peace. "Me and my boys were just looking for a bit of hospitality. Ain't that right, boys?" The others chuckled, the sound oily and sharp. Jack shifted slightly, the rifle steady. Ain't got nothing here for you. The leader's smile turned mean. Ain't how it works, friend. You got supplies, maybe some valuables. Maybe, company. Abigail's blood went cold. The man's gaze slid toward the cabin windows, speculative and foul. Abigail pressed herself flatter against the wall, bile rising in her throat. Jack took a single step forward onto the porch, his voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Turn around. Walk away. For a moment, the leader seemed to consider it. Then he laughed, a hard, barking sound, and reached for the pistol at his side. Jack moved faster. The rifle cracked, the shot shattering the air like thunder. The leader stumbled back with a scream, clutching his hand, blood pouring between his fingers. Chaos erupted. The two remaining men drew their guns, but Jack was already moving, reloading with the precision of long practice. Another shot rang out, sending one outlaw sprawling into the dirt. The last man fired wildly, the bullet splintering the cabin's porch post inches from Jack's head. Abigail flinched, heart in her mouth. Jack didn't hesitate. He charged forward like an avalanche, covering the distance between him and the gunman in 3 strides. The man barely had time to scream before Jack slammed the rifle butt into his face, dropping him like a sack of grain. Silence descended, broken only by the moans of the injured leader writhing in the dirt. Jack loomed over him, the rifle aimed square at his chest. Tell your friends, Jack said, his voice low and full of iron. You come back here, you don't walk away. The leader nodded frantically, dragging himself to his feet and limping into the trees without a backward glance. The other 2 men followed, one half carrying the other, leaving behind a trail of blood and fear. Jack watched them go until the woods swallowed them, then lowered the rifle with a long, slow breath. Abigail sagged against the wall, legs trembling, her pulse thundering in her ears. Jack turned, his face carved in grim lines. When he saw her, some of the hardness melted away. You all right? She nodded jerkily, though she wasn't sure if it was true. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into a rough embrace. At first, she stiffened, unused to such sudden closeness. But then she felt the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of him, the sheer reality of his presence anchoring her. Her hands clutched his shirt, and for a long moment, she let herself be held. When she finally pulled back, Jack studied her with a gentleness that stole her breath. World's full of men like them, he said quietly. But it's full of better ones, too. Tears burned at her eyes, and she blinked them away fiercely. I'm so tired of being afraid, she whispered. You don't have to be, Jack said. Not here. The simple conviction in his voice broke something open inside her. She realized with a jolt that she wasn't just afraid of the world, she was afraid of wanting too much, of hoping, of believing she could be wanted, needed, loved. Jack saw the struggle in her eyes and didn't push. He simply offered her space, safety, and the choice to trust. She swallowed hard, heart pounding. I want to stay, she said, her voice barely above a breath. Jack's answering smile was slow and fierce, like the sunrise clawing its way over a jagged ridge. Good, he said simply. You're where you belong. The fire crackled between them, casting long, golden shadows that danced across the walls. Abigail felt something shift inside her, a foundation being laid, brick by hard-won brick. Outside, the forest stood silent and watchful, a wild world that asked only for strength and resilience. Inside the cabin, two souls, both battered, both scarred, began to knit themselves together in the fragile, stubborn hope of something more. The danger had not passed, the road ahead would not be easy, but Abigail no longer faced it alone. And as she met Jack's steady gaze, she knew with a certainty as fierce as the beating of her heart, she never would again. Spring melted into summer in the mountains, and life, though hard, began to take on a rhythm, a cadence of sweat, laughter, and unexpected joy. Abigail threw herself into each new task with a determination that startled even her. There were fences to mend, fields to clear, gardens to plant. Jack taught her everything he knew, which was more than she'd ever imagined a man could carry inside him. At first, Abigail fumbled more than she succeeded. She split wood awkwardly, cooked bread that turned to bricks, and dropped eggs more often than she gathered them. But Jack never laughed at her failures. He showed her patiently, over and over, until her hands toughened and her movements grew sure. And somewhere along the way, the ache inside her chest, born of rejection, humiliation, fear, began to heal. They built more than just a life together, they built a partnership rooted in fierce respect. Jack never treated her like she was fragile or less than capable because of her size. If anything, he seemed to admire her strength, her resilience, the fire that had kept her going when so many others might have given up. One evening, after a long day hauling lumber from a nearby grove, Jack surprised her with a gift, a hand-carved rocking chair, smooth as river stones under her fingers. Abigail traced the intricate patterns he'd burned into the arms, tiny wildflowers, mountain peaks, a pair of intertwined hearts. "It ain't much," he said, suddenly shy, the tips of his ears turning red. "It's beautiful," she whispered, sinking into it. The chair creaked comfortingly under her, cradling her like a promise. Jack grinned, boyish and unguarded. "Figured you earned a proper place to rest, after working circles around me." Abigail laughed, a full, rich sound that startled even herself. She realized then how rare her laughter had been, how deeply buried her happiness had become, and how effortlessly Jack had coaxed it to the surface. Later, as dusk folded the sky into shades of purple and gold, they sat together on the porch, the sounds of the forest humming around them like a lullaby. Jack's hand brushed against hers, and when their fingers tangled, neither pulled away. In the quiet, Abigail found herself speaking truths she had hidden for too long. "I thought when I came out here that maybe no one would ever see me." "Not really." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "Back home, I was just a problem to be fixed. A disappointment. Too much of everything." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Back there, maybe. But out here," he turned to her, his face open, raw, "out here, you're everything I didn't know I was waiting for." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but she let them fall. There was no shame in them, not here, not with him. Jack leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You're strong, Abigail. Fierce. Beautiful." His voice dropped low and rough. "You're the kind of woman who makes a man better just by standing beside him." When he kissed her, it wasn't hurried or desperate. It was deep, reverent, a slow claiming of something sacred between them. Abigail kissed him back with everything she had, every scar, every dream, every piece of herself she had once been told was unworthy. The season shifted again. Summer's lushness gave way to the crisp sharpness of autumn. The days grew shorter, the air cooler, but the warmth between them never waned. Together, they rebuilt the cabin stronger than before, adding a second room and a stone hearth. Abigail planted rows of vegetables, and Jack trapped and hunted, their larder filling steadily for the coming winter. The days were full of backbreaking labor, but each night they found comfort in each other's arms, in whispered promises and shared dreams. Still, danger never strayed far in the wild places. Word had spread about the cabin deep in the woods, a place rich with stores, protected by a man who'd already bloodied more than one nose. Raiders, desperate settlers, outlaws, they circled like vultures, waiting for a weakness. It came on a night when the first frost clung silver to the grass. Abigail woke to the faint crackle of flames and the acrid sting of smoke. Heart pounding, she shook Jack awake. "Fire," she gasped. He was up instantly, grabbing his rifle. Together they burst onto the porch and saw the barn ablaze, the flames roaring higher with each passing second. Jack swore under his breath. They saw it then, figures moved beyond the glow, 3, maybe 4 men, their faces hidden under scarves and hats. Jack pushed Abigail toward the cabin door. "Stay inside. Bar it tight." "No," she said fiercely, gripping his arm. "We stand together." He stared at her for a long moment, something like pride flickering through his eyes. Then he nodded once. The battle was brutal and fast. Jack moved like a force of nature, every shot deliberate, every movement honed. Abigail reloaded his spare rifle, her hands steady despite the terror clawing at her gut. One raider fell, clutching his leg and screaming. Another fled into the woods after a warning shot grazed his shoulder. The others, seeing their comrades fall, broke and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Jack doused the flames with every bucket of water they could muster, but the barn was lost. Still, they saved the livestock, the garden, the cabin, the heart of their life. When the fire finally died, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins, Jack turned to Abigail. Soot streaked his face and his shirt was torn, but his eyes shone with fierce, unbroken light. "You all right?" he rasped. She threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "I'm better than all right. I'm alive. We're alive." Jack hugged her tight, lifting her off her feet for a moment. When he set her down, he kept her face in his calloused hands. "I ain't ever letting you go," he said. "You're stuck with me," she said, laughing shakily. "Damn right I am." Under the bruised sky, surrounded by ash and ruin, they kissed, an unspoken vow that no fire, no enemy, no force in the world could break them apart. Winter came early that year, heavy and relentless, but inside the cabin, warmth blossomed. Abigail and Jack married in front of the hearth, with only the trees and the mountains as their witnesses. She wore a simple dress sewn from the finest linen Jack could afford, and he carved their wedding bands himself, twisting silver wire into rugged circles that gleamed in the firelight. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Jack looked her straight in the eye and said, "You're my home, Abigail. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." She echoed the vow with her whole heart, her whole soul. Their days fell into a new rhythm of surviving, thriving, and dreaming. They spoke of building a bigger house come spring, of planting orchards and maybe even starting a school for the scattered children of nearby homesteads. The world outside their valley remained hard and cruel, but it could not touch what they had built together. Love, real love, had taken root here in the blood and sweat and stubborn hope of two people the world had once dismissed. It was not the life Abigail had dreamed of when she first answered the mail-order bride advertisement. It was something better, something she never even knew she was allowed to want. She was no longer a girl running from shame and rejection. She was a woman, standing tall beside the man who saw her, chose her, cherished her without condition. And as the snow fell thick and silent over the forest, blanketing the scars of old battles, Abigail sat in her rocking chair, Jack beside her, and smiled into the fire's glow. Their love was not delicate or easy. It was forged like steel, tempered in fire, tested by wind and storm. It was a love that endured. And it was only just beginning.